Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of On Air. We are here with Margaret Agard today. Did I say your last name right?
You did.
I did. Well, because the moment I hit start, I'm like it goes out of my mind, and I know sometimes I'll say names terribly, and I hate messing up people's names with it. But Margaret, listen, it's so nice to have you here with us today. I'm looking forward to this. Read a little bit on you and some things like that, and um, they say you have a little sense of humor with you, which I always enjoy that as well. My family is very much. We grew up in a preacher's kid. I was a
Yeah,
preacher's kid, so if you didn't laugh, you were crying, right?
yeah. I have a friend who's sure God has a sense of humor. He said they're laughing. They were laughing once during prayer, and he said, "I think God was too."
Yes. So, but Margaret, I today what I like to do is let's just go ahead and start off. If you tell us a little bit about you and share the story or what God's laying on your heart today for us.
I I really like to share, Michael, with how I figured out for me personally how to turn my life over to God. And it happened when I was in my mid 40s. I was a single mom. I had 8 kids at home, and I was their sole financial support. I was trying to finish up my degree because I only had 2 semesters left. And I worked in the high tech industry as an executive. And a lot of companies were going public. This was years ago. And, you want your executives to have some credentials. So I was trying to,
Right.
get that degree so it'd show some credentials. And, any of those would have been a full time job. I was going to school full time. I had 8 children that I was mothering. The youngest at the time was 12, and the oldest was heading up to, they were born, 11 years apart, the oldest and the youngest. So he was in his 20s, but going to college and living at home. And I don't know, it just seemed like I'm working full time to bring in enough money. Uh, and with executives, it's not like you can just put in your 8 hours a day and go home. That's a demanding job. And so I just couldn't somehow figure out how to do it all. And and I know, how to set priorities. I wouldn't have
Right.
gotten where I was if I didn't. And the time came when I just was like, no matter what I did, it seemed to be something I didn't have to do. This is back when you actually went to class. A paper would be due. And so I'd stay up late working on the paper, and I'd go in and there'd be a note on the door, the professor's sick. Don't worry about the paper till, next week. And I'd be, well, if I'd known that, I could have worked on something else. Right. And
Right.
so that's really where I was. If I'd only known. And it seemed like that was happening more and more. And so finally I thought, well, I don't know the future, but I do know who does. And so that's the point where, yes, what I started with was just taking, like my list of to-dos, my 3x5 card or whatever it was, and just kneeling down and saying, okay, here's what I think I have to do today. And at the time, I was lucky to get 4 hours sleep a night. And even then, I'd wake up in the middle of the night thinking, something's not done, something's not done. And so I would just take that list and kneel down and say, what do I have to do today? That was the question I started with. Like, what do I have to do today to
Hmm.
make sure everything gets done, the kids get fed, finish my classes, that, and the kids are taken care of. And and I had learned to recognize that still small voice by this point. So I could look at the list and think, oh, I don't need to do that. I don't need to do that, and somehow it would all work out. And and even more, I would sometimes think, but I I feel like God was saying to me, I want you to call a certain person, or on your way home, I want you to stop by this person's house and just visit for a few minutes. And so he would take some things off my plate, but usually what he put back in was something to take care of another person, in a sense.
Mm.
And so I had done that. I did that. It only took a few weeks, and I was finished every night by 8, as long as I didn't add things. If you are used to being that busy, it's hard to just actually sit. You're like,
Yes.
well, we could probably do 10 other things now, between 8 at night and 2 in the morning. And so to just have myself sit was part of it. That's interesting. I'm going to add this in here, Michael. Um, what I learned was I've done enough. Like eventually we get a sense at certain ages, we have enough stuff. I don't need more stuff. I have enough, right? There's enough. And the Lord promises us we'll have enough. He doesn't promise us we're going to have more than enough. And
Right.
so I had this sense of, you've done enough. You can stop. And when I would think about the creation account, and he would stop, he'd say, okay. I mean, you had a whole lot to do. It probably took a lot to create a whole world and all that stuff going on, right? And all those animals and put people on it. But he would just say, okay, so this is the first day and we're done. We're stopping. We're calling it a day. So that's what
Right.
I was able to do, to realize I had done enough and I could just stop. And that was about 8 o'clock at night that would happen.
Hmm.
So, yeah. And so that was my first question, Michael. What do I have to do? Now, that
Yes.
eventually morphed into, oh, what do you want me to do?
Hmm.
And that's where I could pull some scriptures in, because I think of Christ in John 8:28. He says, or 8:29, something, 8:29. He says, the Father I have always with me, because I do always those things that please him. And we'd read about how he went off into prayer, and then he would come back and say, okay, we're going to Samaria, wherever we're going, right? And then things would happen along the way. And I realized that by asking that question, what do you want me to do, God? He actually then began to life in a different direction,
Hmm.
bit by bit. It wasn't sell everything, go become Mother Teresa in India. It was more of a bit by bit change.
Right.
Yeah. And so
Right.
it's interesting is I keep talking. You're just like, okay. But
No, I love it
well,
because
okay.
the intentionality of it, because the focus of and our perspective on how we look at life and how we do it, because um, some people are perfectionists, some people uh, can't. As my wife and women probably tend to be this more, because let's just be honest, women, you know, my wife, she takes care of the kids, she takes care of the house, she works a full-time job, and she's always going, going, going. And in this stage of our life, it's like, sometimes God wants you to just be still. I'm like, that can be taken care of tomorrow. What can I delegate some of that? Let us help you. And I had to tell my wife, I was like, listen, I don't know. I'm a man.
Right.
So I don't know. I need you to be specific. How can I help you to do that?
Exactly.
But I learned in my life too, that a lot of things that I found and thought were important to do, and so high on that to-do list, were not really high on God's to-do list either.
Exactly. That's exactly what happened. It was like, you don't need to do this and you don't need to do that. And don't add projects, because I don't know how that men do it, but I know women do, especially with social media. I'm like, I could I could make that little thing, and I have 8 kids, and they have families now. I could make 8 of those and give them, to all of them, some craft, some, who knows what it is. And God's like, no. You don't have
Yes.
time for that, so that it's very helpful. My sister says, God's always talking to you. And I said, well, have you noticed most of the time he's saying, don't do that? But you probably don't, he doesn't have to say anything to you because you're just doing the right thing. He doesn't have to like move you around, where I'm always headed in some odd direction. And he's like, yeah, no,
We
don't go there.
well, yeah, I think one of the hardest things for us as Christians, though, is to hear God, because I say this all the time on my show. I tend to lend my ear to the enemy way more than I do God sometimes. I will listen to the negative things that he keeps putting in my head, and things that try to defeat me. And I've been learning, is this voice I'm hearing right now, is this my God talking to me, or is this the enemy talking to me? And then once I was able to start discerning that a little bit better, um, it was clearing up, and I was hearing God's voice a whole lot more than before, because I was distinguishing who was speaking to me. But I think a lot of Christians, one of our problems has been uh, listening to God, because we have it mapped out, we have it all figured out, and when God's way, this has been the theme this month on here, has been God's ways is not our
Our
ways.
ways,
You
because his
know?
ways are higher, right? And so that,
Yep.
and I got that also from the Lord's Prayer. This is what came across to me from the Lord's Prayer. There's the part where we say in this squeaky chair, there's a part where we say, may thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And I'm trying to imagine the angels in heaven with their to-do list, kind of ignoring God, but every once in a while running over and saying, hey, I'm working on this. Can you help me? Or I'm stuck here. Kind of like our prayers are, right? Or are they going up and saying to him, I am so committed to what you're trying to accomplish here. What do you want me to do? What can I do today? So it
Right.
becomes that's when it became a different question, when I began to see that I was part of a greater whole, and that, this will sound odd, but he can use my weaknesses as well as my strengths. And I'm going to share a story here, which I don't usually share, and it isn't even in the book. So bonus news story just for you guys.
Great.
We had when my children were much younger, I was in my 30s, and a man broke into our house and assaulted my 12-year-old and daughter.
Mm,
And we didn't hear him. You'd think you would hear him. You think you hear everything. We did not. And
right.
but that isn't the point of the story. And then the 11-year-old was in the room, and he came in through the room where our 4-year-old daughter usually slept. And she had come into her sister's room and was like, can I sleep in here? And well, all right. But this we're being mean to her. We said, you can, but you have to sleep in the closet and you have to keep the door closed. And she agreed to that, just to be in their bedroom. And they say, Mom, we think he was after her. We think he would have taken her, and
Oh,
we never would have found her. But they were being kind of mean older sisters. And usually they loved her and did stuff with her. They'll tell funny stories.
right.
But at night they were like, nope, sorry, if you want to sleep in here, I gotta stay in that closet with the door closed. And so he never saw her.
Wow.
And so I do think he uses our weaknesses as well as our strengths.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. And, we were kind of talking about adversities earlier. Uh, People tend to see these things as uh, sometimes negative and bad, uh, with adversity, things that we go through. And I think it's all perspective, because uh, without failures, it you can't enjoy the success more. In fact, without failures, it's almost impossible to have success. Uh, but I have learned more from my failures and my weaknesses, and I have grown more from them. And God has used those more in helping others than my success stories. It's been through those weak moments of that, and even what you just shared. Um, we had Our son was sexually assaulted as a young boy by a Christian friend of ours, a friend of the family,
Yep.
and it was hard to know how, going through how God allowed that, how that, and I don't think I will ever fully understand everything till I go to heaven and God tells me. But I can tell you, in the just last 2 years, watching how my son has overcome that, and how through counseling, but through his, it's developed his faith more, It's developed his character more. And I'm not saying God caused it for that reason at all. But in spite
Right.
of that, he has overcome some adversities that a lot of people can't. And it's really hard to understand. Some people can be faced with the same thing, and you see some people that it will crumble them. It will
Right.
cause them to turn into to drugs or self-destructive behavior. But then you see other people who turn um, that terrible moment in their life into a victory moment and will thrive in spite of what happened. And we're not just, some people say, well, that's because they had God and this and that. I've seen a lot of Christians
Right.
who had God that could
And
not do that.
no. Well, I
And
had
I
a
don't know what that is.
I was going to
Go
say I
ahead.
had a friend. I have two thoughts here, but one, and this is a little story in the book called Purple. I have a friend who said she went to God one day in her 40s, and she said, I think I could take everything that's happened to me, including the fact that one day while they're at their church, their dishwasher caught fire and the whole house burned down. So do not put wooden spoons in your dishwasher. I'm just going to mention that. But
Oh, thank you, because I do that.
yes, do not, unless you're home, maybe. So they accept this sexual assault she had undergone as a young girl with a favorite uncle, and she had this question come to her, and this relates, I think, to what you're saying about your son. God said, "What's the character trait you are most proud of?" And she immediately thought it's her ability in a crisis situation to just jump right in and know what to do and do it. Where other people are thinking, "Isn't that a crisis?" She's doing it, and her extreme empathy, her ability to really feel what's going on with people. And as soon as she had that thought, she realized she could see the connection. I can't see it, but she could see the connection by what happened to her and her developing those character traits.
Yeah.
And so, he tells us in 828, all things will work for your good. Well, we're pretty sure the good things are going to work for our good. So he's talking, of course, about the bad things, and
Yes.
that does happen. And I think this is what you saw with your son, that he developed these.
Yes. And I
Um,
like that you pointed out that verse, because you're right. You know, he didn't say that to tell us that the good things are going to work out for our good. We know that. But the bad things, and those are the moments that God just can shine so bright. And in those moments, is when it's also a testimony to others, because I remember people who aren't Christians and they watched our family during that time period were like, we don't know how you guys are doing this. And it was like, we're doing it because, you know, one, we're Christians, we have our faith
right.
is really strong. And then we had the love of our church that rallied around us and walked that with us,
With you.
that helped us even embolden our faith even more, with God telling us, you are not alone. You are not alone.
That's right.
And now we're using that,
Yeah.
and so I resonate what you just said with that.
I think,
Mo-
I was going to say, I think that's the only answer I have. If you believe in God and you believe in free will, then you have one answer. If you don't, people are like, well, I don't believe in God because bad things happen. You're like, well, if you believe in God and you believe in free will, so I say he doesn't stop. He may sometimes give us some warnings so we can sort of move away from a bad situation, but he doesn't stop us from doing what we do, right? He's not going to stop us. He's made it very
right,
clear that if I want to say something mean, he doesn't suddenly have me lose my voice.
right,
If I'm going to go eat 2 quarts of ice cream because I'm feeling anxious, he's not going to like lock it all up or lock my jaw so I can't do it to myself or hurt
right.
someone else. He just doesn't. But he does promise us that he can turn it to our good, and that Christ says, you don't have to carry this. I've heard people say he won't give you more than you can handle, but he doesn't. There's nowhere in the scriptures that says that. You
Right.
can't find a verse that says that. There's a lot of verses that imply you're going to get way more than you can handle, and I'll help you handle it.
Yes. Yes. In our weakness, he is made strong. You know, he is. It's amazing. I do want to go ask you. You're an author, and your book. Can you tell us about that? I
I
mean,
have
you've
uh,
prefaced it a couple times. I would love for you to tell us.
I have the two books out. The first book is In His Footsteps. I gave my to-do list to God. Got more done, more sleep, and less stress, because who knows why I came up with that title. But it is a memoir. It isn't a how-to book. And I am just sharing these experiences, like the story about purple, or when I started giving my to-do list to God and what happened as a result. And so that's the first book. It's interesting because at the time I was spending a lot of time helping struggling people. And at the end of and they were, I mean, they were the kind of people that were struggling because they were making bad choices. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah. And all I ever felt when I helped them was God's love for them. I never felt
Right.
him say, here, I'm sorry, Margaret, we both know this person is, you know, making bad choices and you're going to have to go help them. I always just felt his love for them. And so
Right.
by the end of the book, I mean, if you say to any Christian, does God love you? Oh, sure. Yep, got it. But it's all up here in their head. A lot of Christians, and I was one, believe, well, I'm not quite good enough. I don't really feel it, right? But by the end of that year that I write about, that is exactly how I felt. I can remember one day thinking, wow, if he loves these messed up people this much. And we're talking to people on drugs who are living in these rat infested houses, and they just can't seem to afford a plumber, but they can afford new exercise equipment. And you just
Yes.
are like, yeah. And so I thought, I I finally opened my heart and really felt how much love he had for me. So I say, I used to try to do good so God would love me. And now I know how much he loves me and I want other people to see it, feel it. And so I want to go out and do good so they feel that love.
I love that. I was one of those people. Uh, I went through a major issue in my life. It took me 15 years to find restoration toward God. And a friend had asked me, Mike, what does God see when he looks at you? What do you think he sees? And I was like a horrible person.
Mm,
Now I could see how God loved everybody else, like you said, the drug addict, the whatever, but I was the exception to that
right.
rule, and so, uh, and thank God for his amazing grace that he's brought to me. And even though it took me 15 years to get there, I'm so thankful he took me on that journey, because to be able to say that today, that and know that God loves me, what a joy it is. And I
Yes.
want to share it with other people because I want them to feel and
To feel
know
that love.
that same
Yes.
joy. Yep.
Yep. Exactly. It's interesting because I did finally pray that prayer. How do you see me, God? And we don't have time for any of this. And I do have a story in the book about praying for my 15-year-old. Help me to see him like you do, and had this amazing experience. But at the same time, I'm still taking care of people because I live in the country. And I have a son who said, "Mom, where do you?" Because he's like, "Where are you?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm waiting for someone to come out from their parole officer." And he's like, "Where do you meet these people?" I thought, I meet them at church. Don't you have people like this at your church? Like, maybe you should move to the country. I don't know why you don't have these people. And so, um, and the other day, this is very new. He said to me, "Margaret, you don't. It's not your responsibility to fix these people. I just want you to enjoy them." And then he went beyond it, because I still saw them in my mind as broken people. These are broken people. They grew up in terrible homes. A lot of them lived in
Right.
tents when they were. And so he said, they're not broken. They have strengths. He said they might need some healing, and I provide that healing. But why don't you see them as someone with strengths and gifts to share with you, instead of someone you
Mm,
have to help?
wow.
And that he said, this is a privilege for
Mm,
you to help these people, to spend time with them is a privilege.
I love it.
Yeah, which was different. I'm still kind of thinking about it because this has only happened in the last few weeks. I'm like, thank you for letting me live more than 70 years. That's what I say to God. Because I'm just now starting to get it. Okay. Like, like how old is
Yes.
Moses? I think I'm kind of there. Like maybe you should let me live until like 125 because maybe I would really get it. But yeah.
I'm with you. I was just talking to someone the other day, and they were talking about just, oh, they hated this Monday that they're going, because I'm going to have to work with this person. I don't know why God keeps doing this to me, and going on, and I was like, I just felt the Holy Spirit tell them this, and I was like, because you always feel like you're going to feel. I'm not trying to be spiritual. I'm not trying to be someone come to you in as a Pharisee or whatever. But I looked at it, I go, why don't you look at it as, wow, God's entrusted you with this person, and what power God's going to maybe use in your life to either help this person, or that this person, God has something from this person you're going to learn so that you can become better.
Right.
And it's all perspective. We could choose to be miserable in our circumstances. And I did that for a long time. I worked at a prison. Let me tell you, you want to talk about a miserable place to be? You
Yeah.
can be miserable. But I realized I get to decide my perspective on everything. And I
Yep.
get to choose how to look at this. And that's when God started really opening my eyes more, and my compassion toward other people changed greatly from there. And now I'm one of these people, when I see someone, I'm really curious. I want to know their story. I want to know who they are.
Not why do you
Who,
act like that, but what happened to you?
yep. And I love that. So you wrote one book, and now you have another book out.
And the second one was we just kind of sell everything and went around. We like lived in Albuquerque for a while, worked in the prison jail there. And then we were up in Alaska, and I just call it like emails from the mission fields. Like we just sold everything. And then the third one, the one I'm working on, is taking forever, and I hope it's done now because I've been saying for 10 years I'm going to finish it before the end of this year, but I think I really am this time, is about my marriage. So my first marriage ended. My husband was gay, and he was kind of a Peter Pan kind of guy. Like, I don't want to
Uh-huh.
grow up. Okay. So, and we had 8 children. So somebody was taking care of us all. It was me. And so one day God said to me, you're going to meet the man you're going to marry next fall. And I said, no, thank you. Because I still had 2 teenage sons at home, and I had never, ever seen a good marriage. I really hadn't, or of a blended family
Yeah.
where there were teenagers the same sex as the step parent. And
Right.
I didn't have much hope for that. But I did meet and marry Parker. And at one point, it wasn't looking good. You know how often you're headed down a path that God has put you on and it doesn't look good? Like you're in Rome waiting for your head to be cut off, like Paul, right? Like, this is not looking good. And so I said to God, okay, I feel like this was from you. I feel like I've made the right choice. At the same time, this is not looking good. If you could just give me a verse to hold on to,
Mm.
because I know these verses because they're what got me through things. And instead of a verse, I got a promise. And the promise was this: all will be made whole as a result of this marriage. So my first marriage was contentious. Her father came out afterwards and said, I'm gay. And my children were struggling with a lot. I was.
Right.
My second husband, he grew up in an alcoholic abusive home. He had his problems. And so I knew that what Christ meant when he said, by faith had made thee whole, to the woman with the issue of blood, to the 10th leper. He was referring, that word, if you look it up in its original, is referring to a spiritual and emotional wholeness, not
Mm.
physical healing. And
Yeah.
so I realized that's what I held on to. And so the book is just about, what we went through, how we got there. I have like titles like The 3-Day Mad, and, Parker and I are a genius, and just the things we went through to get that healing, which then spilled over to the children.
And I love that. I love that you wrote that down, because through other people's stories, uh, we can grow even more. And I was my listeners know this. I was not I before the age of 50. I bet you I read 5 books
Hmm.
in my life. I was just not a reader, but I felt I had a lot of educational problems growing up, and I believed the lie that I was stupid, I was
Mm.
dumb, and all that stuff. But through my healing process, I found such great books
Huh.
that I couldn't put down that I was able that God used, to help me. And I love reading other people's stories and seeing how the lessons God taught them, because these are lessons that you're learning. I may not have to go through some of the trials and tribulations you went through to learn it, because I can learn through yours, and I love it. I ended up writing a book, a, a tell-all book, and I was
I've
like,
seen that on your site.
yes, it's called Exposed, and I wrote about and it talks about so much. My family didn't know I was sexually molested as a child by a missionary and stuff like that. And um, until my book came out, hey everybody, here it is.
Right.
But there's a lot of things in my life that I was afraid people would know, and if and that I would be exposed. And God said one day, "Well, we're going to take care of that. I'm going to expose you, and I'm going to write a book, and this is what we're going to do." And I'm like, "Nah, I can pass on that." But I didn't, and so it came out in January, and there's something powerful about sharing your story too, not just reading other people, but when I was able to articulate my story, how it was life changing for me, but then to see it, how it affected other people, it's just what that was such a gift from God to me to be able to write my book and to see that. And I'm sure you experience the same thing with sharing your stories.
I want the stories. If a book doesn't have a story, I'm like, give me a story. Tell me about it. I want to hear the story.
Yes.
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 Yeah.
And I've had several people, they picked up the book and they're like, after the first chapter, I couldn't, because the first chapter
Stop.
talks about, it starts off with the FBI at my doorstep.
Oh, good way to
And
start it.
yeah, you want to talk about a paradigm shift that took place in my life. It sure did. But it took 15 years to get there.
Yeah.
Now, where can they go, Margaret? Where can we go to get your book? Because I'm a big advocate of reading, and I'm very curious. So I definitely want um, to get your books, and then I probably will love to have you, uh, probably in another couple months, have you back on the show after reading your book
That'd
and
be great.
discussing it. So, where can we go to find that?
You go to inhisfootsteps.com. It has the 3 books on the first page, and a lot about me and my social media and my YouTube channel and blog. And the the books are available at most bookstores. The ebook is basically on Kindle. I probably have it on the other ebook site too. And then I have just one audiobook. The first one is available as an audiobook on
Awesome.
multiple
I
sites.
love Audible. I put mine on Audible as well, because that's how I started reading again, was through Audible,
Right.
and then that encouraged me more. And now, I'm realizing I can read faster than I can listen to it, and
That's when you start frustrated.
because I get into some of these stories and I'm like, I want to know. I don't want to wait 5 hours
Right.
from now to find out this.
Right.
So
That's funny.
so it's amazing how God can work in our life and change us and take what we think is what the lies we believed our whole life, and find out that once you realize those were lies,
Yeah.
and through Christ, I I am enough with him, and it's just great. And for people that are listening today, I'm hoping that you know we all have adversities in our life. You can't get through life without adversity. I think it's all perspective. on how you choose to look at them and who you choose to walk it with you. And as Christians, we say it a lot. We don't know how people manage who are not Christians going through some of the things that they are, because my faith was really big in going through. I had some major failures. I had some character flaws that I didn't like admitting in my book, but uh, because
There
I
it
thought God
is.
would hate me, but God
Right,
knew already my character flaws, but by admitting to those, God was saying, "Okay, now I can mold you into the man I've always wanted you to be."
right, right.
And so it's
Very good.
amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing. But Margaret, thank you so much for being on our show today. I've just really enjoyed it. I will be getting your book, and I
I've
look
got
forward to
yours.
having.
Thanks for putting it on
Well,
Kindle Unlimited. But mine is not on Kindle
exactly.
Unlimited, but it could be one day. You never know.
Hey, that's okay. I'm gonna go get it. I actually am going on a trip this weekend, flying out, so I'll probably read it or get the Audible. We'll see,
Okay.
and go through that. But I'll get with you, and we'll schedule to come back. And I want to encourage my listeners, want do the same thing. Read it. Go get her book right now. Go check it out, and listen. A couple months, come back together, and discuss some of the things that we've learned about Margaret and her book, and some of those things.
Okay.
So.
Thank
All
you.
right, Margaret.
Okay.
Thank you so much for being on our show. I really enjoyed our conversation today. And to my listeners, until next time, just keep being intentional. We'll talk to you later.